everyone. My name is Maria Leroux. I'm chairman of the Economic Development Committee. Thank you for attending this evening. I'll start by giving a brief introduction. The Economic Development Committee is comprised of 10 members. We have representation from local businessmen, Schneider Electric, the Craft Organization, and our membership really brings a lot of experience in the area of development to the table. We've spent the past couple of years working on different projects to improve the opportunities for economic development in the town. And one of our subgroups, which is the Route 1 subcommittee, has spent an extraordinary amount of time looking at zoning and improvements that could be made to zoning in the Route 1 corridor. This evening, you'll be hearing from members of our committee, and they will provide you with real detail on those proposed changes. And I want to especially thank Paige Duncan for her efforts in leading our group and keeping us focused for the past couple of years. She really keeps us informed at all times with a wealth of information and really has helped us very much. Also been very successful with obtaining grants to help us with our efforts. So I'll turn it over to Paige and Kevin, and thank you very much again.
So, I mean, essentially, you'll see a presentation, but basically, when we did the master plan, and for some time before that, the planning board and others around the town had made a commitment that we felt that Route 1 is and will be the economic engine for the town. We have other nodes, other business nodes in the town that are going to be significant in their own way, but none of them will hold a candle to what the potential is on Route 1. And in addition to that, many of us have a very strong feeling about the fact that the existing zoning on Route 1, the S1 zoning, with the exception of the overlay district that was developed when the stadium came, needed to be revised, and strongly revised, because people who are landowners up there really have difficulty in seeing opportunities to develop their land. A lot of situations where someone or groups of people who own land up there would have to go before the zoning board and with their hat in their hand and find a way with a lot of representation, both engineering and legal and other, in order to make something fit there. It was very restrictive. And we felt strongly that it was time to make alterations up there. You can see a lot of that information this evening if you haven't seen it before, and to provide opportunity for a variety of different uses, to establish some parity with some of the things that are already in existence in the overlay district for others that are up there. We're not expanding the overlay district, but we're allowing a lot of things that were allowed by right there become allowed by right in the rest of the district. And we think it's going to be exciting. We think it's going to provide real opportunity, and more things will be allowed by right if this passes town meeting. And one of the reasons that's very important is because people who want to come to the state of Massachusetts and want to come to a town like Foxborough need to know that their project is not going to be potentially held up through a year or two of hearings because of special permit requirements. They want to know that they can go to the governor, or they can go to the state economic development people and say, hey, here's the project we have. What are the communities in the state of Massachusetts that will allow us to develop in this way? And we want to be on that list. If we don't do some of the things that we want to do with this rezoning, we won't be on that list. And we're hoping that that's going to generate a lot of interest in the town of Foxborough, and that it's going to mean a lot of jobs and a lot of tax dollars back to the town. So, an opportunity for people who've been wanting to do something with their land to do it. There's always going to be some of the people up there who are happy, with a parking lot or whatever, that they feel that's the highest and best use for their potential need. But there's a lot of others up there who really want to do something, and we want to give them the opportunity to do it. So, that's my initial piece. say?
I think you said it all. Well said.
So it's time to begin the presentation. For those that don't know me, I'm Barney Overbright, I'm a member of the Economic Development Committee, also am the current chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So we're ready for the presentation. What we have is a summary of the zoning proposals that we will be presenting to town meeting. The planning board has a public hearing concerning these proposals on Thursday night. We meet with the AdCom to answer some questions on April 24th, and AdCom will be voting on the proposals with other matters on April 25th, and then on town meeting, of course, is on May 14th. So, if we're ready. And Kevin used the terms S1 district, special use district, and economic development area overlay district. And just to put things in context, these are zoning districts. The overlay is an overlay over the S1 district. And this will show you where the S1 district itself is. And it comprises 727 plus acres. Its length along Route 1 is about 2.5 plus or minus miles. And the overlay district, again, overlays a portion of the S1 district. And out of context, the Patriot Place complex and the stadium are all in the overlay district. And obviously, they're also in the S1 district.
Is the overlay district the same as the S1?
Now, the overlay district overlays the S1. The S1 is larger. The overlay district is about 495 acres, but it overlays a portion of the S1.
Why only that portion? What's
You want to go?
I mean, do you want to have questions?
Well, we'll do this, and then we'll do the rest of the presentation, and we'll let everybody ask. So the why was because when the stadium was going to come in, the new stadium was going to come in, there were certain things that needed to be done on the stadium property and requests to do certain things by right that were not allowed in the S1. The overlay district is not only and specific to the stadium and the ownership of land that they have. There are other parcels in the overlay district already that, are not owned by the Kraft Group or the stadium. So there always was some land there that's there. We did not, at the time, we wanted to avoid any feeling that there was spot zoning and that we were doing only something specifically and only for the Kraft Group and the stadium property. So these other things that we're doing now will hopefully bring some parity to areas of the S1 without expanding that district.
So these are the master plan goals for Route 1, and as long as everybody can see them, there's no need for me to read them verbatim. But the town's master plan, the award-winning master plan, shows that there are 4 growth nodes in the town of Foxborough. The downtown area, Chestnut Green, Route 1,
And the I-95.
and the I-95.
140 area.
So we're going to concentrate on Route 1 tonight. That's what our zoning proposals are concerned with. And the overall goals of our amendment, of our proposed zoning amendment, are to update and streamline our zoning provisions as they are applicable to Route 1 in order to encourage additional economic development in that area. However, as you read the actual proposals themselves, and as you'll see as we go along in the presentation, a number of the zoning provisions require a special permit from the planning board. So therefore, there is a measure of town governance and oversight of development. We feel there's a nice balance between encouraging development and maintaining town oversight and town governance of development. So essentially, our zoning proposals cover 3 broad areas. One is uses in the S1 district and uses in the overlay district. Second concerns parking provisions, and the third is concerned bulk and dimensional provisions. Now, one of the first things we're doing, as Kevin indicated, is allowing certain uses that currently are either prohibited or that require a special permit to be allowed by right. These uses, mercantile and retail uses, And brew pubs are currently prohibited uses in the S1 district. And what we're proposing is to amend the bylaws to allow them by right. In addition, for mercantile and retail uses, the current bylaw provisions restrict the usable square footage of a mercantile and retail use to 25% of the gross floor area. We're proposing to increase that by right to 75% and allow beyond that by special permit from the planning board. Now, in addition to allowing certain uses that are now prohibited to be allowed by right, there are various uses that we feel are appropriate for the S1 district that currently require a special permit but are appropriate to be allowed by right. And they include research and development facilities, hotels and motels, outdoor-indoor recreational uses, and outdoor athletic fields and athletic facilities. That would be a new use. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. Research and development. We've principally what we're doing in research and development is defining it for the first time. Research and development is a use that is currently allowed in the bylaw. However, there is no definition of the use. And what we're doing is providing a definition that would principally govern life science, biotech, and biomedical uses. And to give you a little bit of background, the life science sector in Massachusetts is a continued growth area. It's up 28% in the past 10 years. It supports more than 66,000 jobs in Massachusetts. The average salary for these positions is in excess of $138,000, and there's over $9 billion in Massachusetts-based wages in 2016. The concept of bio-ready rating is one that promotes towns that have zoning and capacity in place for life science development. What we're proposing, again, is to allow R&D uses to be permitted by right in the S1 district. And that would allow Foxborough to become bio-ready and to be competitive for these jobs. And as you'll see a little bit later on, there are a number of other communities in the state that currently allow these kinds of uses by right. And in order to be competitive with those jurisdictions, with those municipalities, we also feel that we should be allowing this by right. Hotels and motels, again, it's to create vibrant economic activity. And again, this is something that is allowed by special permit now, and we're proposing to allow it by right. Outdoor and indoor recreational uses, essentially what we're going to be doing here is to modify the current definition. Again, this is a use that's currently permitted. We're proposing just to modify the definition to add fields, buildings, and facilities for recreational and athletic activities and water parks to that definition. Outdoor athletic fields and facilities. This is a completely new use that we're proposing be added to the table of uses. This would allow for outdoor practice fields and incidental facilities in the S1 district by right, and in the R40 residential district pursuant to special permit by the planning board. We feel that this will generate additional tax revenue to the town. It's something that the New England Revolution are desirable of. It would be something that we feel is beneficial to the community in general, because among other things would allow us to maintain the Revolution as an existing and vibrant member of the community. Assuming, actually, we go back for a second, Peter. Assuming, again, that these proposals are prepared at town meeting. Again, in order to have a practice field in the R40 district, you would need a special permit from the planning board. You can only access a practice field that's located, an athletic field that's located in the R40 district by accessing it from a public way from a non-residential district. In other words, if there is a practice field that's developed in the R40 district that the Kraft family owns, in order to access that, you would have to access from the S1 district. You wouldn't be able to access that from a residential area. Very quickly, we have some fairly lengthy, what we think are very comprehensive and innovative provisions relative to parking. Temporary parking, at the current time, in order to obtain a license for parking for the, for stadium events, or not in the current time, but in the past, it's been 3 years, and we're proposing that those licenses be valid for 1 year.
Or the other way around?
The other way around.
It's 1 year now, and it will be 3 years.
I'm sorry, it will be 3 years. Shared parking, this would allow, by special permit, for 2 or more uses to share a parking facility. And reserved parking, this would allow for uses to obtain a special permit from the planning board to reserve an area for parking. In other words, if a use determines that, according to the bylaw, it needs 100 parking spaces, but they only need 70, then they can hold 30, space for 30, area for 30 spaces as undeveloped land or as landscape land reserved until such time as it's determined that they need that area for parking. So again, as Kevin corrected me, we would be amending the current temporary parking provisions. So instead of a parking permit being valid for 3 years,
1 year.
required for each year, it'll be valid for a 3-year period. Shared parking, again, to amend the provision so that a special permit would allow 2 or more uses to share a parking facility. And these uses must be under either common ownership or pursuant to an agreement between the parties. A reserved parking area would, again, provide, pursuant to a special permit, that an area would be reserved. It wouldn't have to be paved over for parking purposes. It would be maintained in a green or landscape space. Again, we have a number of bulk and dimensional provisions that we're proposing be amended. The first has to do with building height. So currently, by right, in the S1 district, you can have 3 stories, but not exceed 40 feet in height. What we are proposing for the S1 district is, by right, a building can be 70 feet in height. The planning board will have authority to issue a special permit, to consider and issue a special permit to allow a building to be increased in height, but not to exceed 150 feet. And just to give you an indication as to how height may look, the highest point of the stadium is 182 feet. The highest point of the water tower is 194 feet. That's the water tower that's just to the left of the stadium across Route 1. The highest point of the water tower is 199 feet. And this shows a building that's 135 and other buildings that are 70 feet. So conceivably, if the planning board were to grant a special permit to exceed 70 feet, it would be much lower in height than the stadium and the water towers. We're proposing some revisions to the dimensional areas for front and side yards. Front yards, the existing requirement is 75 feet. Side yard, the existing requirement now is 75 feet, reducing both of them to 50 feet. There will be no change on rear yards. As far as frontage, the current requirement is 300 feet, that a use have a 300-foot frontage. We're proposing that the planning board have authority by special permit to reduce that to 100 feet. Current lot size requirement is 80,000 square feet, and we're proposing that the planning board, again by special permit, can reduce that to 40,000 square feet. Contiguous lots, where 2 or more lots are adjacent or contiguous and they're in common ownership, there is case law that says that they are merged for zoning dimensional requirements. And this is a concept of case law that the Zoning Board of Appeals has applied on a number of occasions in the past. We're proposing that a provision be added to the bylaw to codify this. This, in a sense, is not a change to existing law and to existing practice, but it would be a codification of existing law and existing practice. And finally, planned developments. There are planned development provisions in the bylaws. To our knowledge, it's never been requested and obviously never used, and we see no need to retain those provisions, so we're proposing that they be deleted. Open for questions now, or?
Please.
Are these, those, what do you call them, slides or whatever they are those available to print also? They seem to be more, well, sometimes easier to read than what is in here already.
We can put that on the website. We can put the slides here on the website. But you'll find that is a much broader overview, that what you have in front of you is the actual detail and what you'll be voting on.
Sometimes summarize it in just.
Sure.
And I still don't understand this S1 and the economic development areas. Are you proposing different changes in different areas, or is it?
The bulk of the changes are going to be in the S1. There are some
Okay, so take the S1, so,
that's the whole blue area.
Yep.
right, and that's 700 acres, and the other one's 400, so,
So the other one is within that blue area.
okay, so the other one just comes longer down here.
Nope.
And where else? And over there. We don't put them together.
Tony, they're basically
Joe, to answer,
expanding the rights that are in the overlay
Yeah.
district to the S1.
maybe this will answer your question. We're not changing the districts. The districts are going to stay,
You're still keeping those two?
Yes.
we'll keep the two districts, and not,
Because,
there's no need to change the districts. What the need is to update the zoning provisions within the districts. So the districts will remain as is, but what we're changing are some of the permitted uses, some of the dimensional requirements, et cetera, within the districts themselves.
Please.
What's the advantage of changing the minimum lot size?
I mean, I think that there are people up there who don't have more than an acre. So, they would like the opportunity to develop, and this gives them that opportunity. Please.
How many warrant articles cover this?
One.
One?
One.
There are, depending on how I count them, there are more than 30 separate proposals within the one warrant article. And I think there are 30, I counted the other day, 39 sections of the bylaw itself that would either be deleted or revised or would be new. So each specific proposal is important in its own right, and each specific individual proposal furthers the objective of encouraging growth in this area. But unless you look at them as an integral component, single component, it doesn't really obtain the objective and the goals that we feel are appropriate.
It doesn't really seem to give the voter much choice, though, right? I mean, if there's one thing in here that you don't like, your only choice is to vote no for the articles. And you need 2/3 votes here, right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
What is the purpose of bundling in the zoning changes to the R40 district and with all these others? I mean, that's a mile away from Route 1.
Well, it isn't, and we were asked to just repeat the question for people at home. So the question is, why are we revising the R40 when according to the questioner, it appears that R40 is quite a distance, a mile away from the rest of the area. And specifically, there are portions of the R40 that are controlled by the Craft Group. And they have the opportunity there in order to make a change or request a change for this so that they can do some of these things that Barney talked about for the revolution that would involve some additional, let me just finish, some additional practice fields and a facility there so that they wouldn't be sharing facilities and fields with the football team. And if that goes through, the caveat is that there can be no access from any other existing R40 neighborhoods. They would only have access through the commercial area that's there.
Just to show you, this area right here is all R40. So it does border, it does border the S1.
Okay, so, and there have been some minor things that have happened in there in the past, like the relocation of the boats and some other things like that, that I think that have not been disruptive to either the neighborhood or the commercial use. And so that's why we think it should be given consideration.
Right, but these changes that the practice fields that they recommend are not small changes. I mean, there's quite a large number of fields with big buildings. Wants to stop them putting lights or speakers or making a noise hazard for the buildings.
It's a special permit. We would be able to condition it, so that things like you're talking about could not happen.
But why are you lumping that in with this development of Route 1? It seems very much like they're trying to slip that in without it being...
Well, you'll excuse me if I say I resent that. I don't think we're trying to, if we were trying to slip it in, we wouldn't be having public meetings about it. And it's not a slippage at all. It just happens to coincide with what's going on there right now, and it's an opportunity that we believe has merit and should be given consideration by the town meeting.
If I may.
Yeah, please.
Speaking to this gentleman's point,
Wait just a second. Let him, Mr. Tan, just want to...
My name is Peter Tam. I'm not a town resident, but I represent the stadium organization. So we've had a number of these questions, and I can shed a little light on my involvement, and specifically, I think, to the question of the soccer practice facilities. My involvement with the economic development group has been one of a support role, because they are the largest stakeholder in the district. We had an interest, and we expressed an interest. I've represented the organization now for more than 15 years and have been intimately involved in a number of zoning initiatives, including the development of Patriot Place. So we've been keenly interested in ensuring that economic development continues along the corridor. And the organization had recognized and asked me to assist and I think Kevin expressed it best, to ensure that there is some parity. And I think to Joan's question, the parity would come in extending some of the benefits that exist within the EDA, which is the overlay, and extending those benefits into the rest of the S1. Does that make sense? There's a considerable amount more flexibility within the EDA today than exists in the S1. So you see limitations that other property owners have in the S1, that they cannot use their land for certain uses, and they cannot develop them for the same, under the same regulations that you can within the EDA. And I think on behalf of the organization, we recognize that that is counterproductive, I think, to everyone. So as a starting point, that's where I got involved. And in working with Barney and the planning board, we focused on identifying those issues and working with other property owners along the Route 1 corridor who are just as much stakeholders as the organization is, in identifying what we can do better. And the most obvious is the retail restriction that Barney talked about. That was sort of an obvious one, and it's one I think that will enable others to develop their property in a better way. Some of the other questions that arose, and I don't want to monopolize time, but I do want to address your question, but with some context. The flexibility in terms of lot size, in terms of setback, in terms of height. In the EDA, you have considerable flexibility on height that you don't have elsewhere. So we work together to identify and try to create parity, and that's in fact what the provisions would amount to. With respect to soccer, the Revolution, as Chairman Weinfeld indicated, they've run out of space. They need their own practice fields and facilities. They can no longer share with the football team. And it's a challenge finding space and balancing that with other interests, including ensuring you have parking, ensuring all the uses on the site work and work together. We worked with the Board of Appeals and with the Planning Board over the past 2 years, and were able to develop a new practice field, natural grass practice field, in place of one of the old parking areas that was in the interim, it was a boat storage area. Relocated the boat storage area. But in fact, the boat storage area was relocated into a residential area. And it was, that is something that's allowed under the bylaw. And it was done by a special permit process, which worked very well. We invited neighbors to attend. There were protections that were afforded in terms of lighting, security, and access. So that was an example of the type of successful special permit process for a non-residential use that was implemented, and I think most neighbors don't even really realize it's there. We want to do the same thing and enable additional soccer fields in a very large area, which encompasses almost 50 acres, that is zoned, residentially zoned. We don't have an interest in developing more boat storage there. But this is consistent also with the town's master plan goals, which is sort of recreation and creating sort of more open space uses. This is a low-intensity use. It would not be used as for stadium purposes or for commercial purposes, but it would support the revolution. It would have a number of additional practice fields, but access would be protected. I have a concept plan, if you'd like to see, and this is a plan that was shared with the neighbors at a recent neighborhood meeting. Bear with me. So the area that Barney and Kevin talked about is this area here. And you can see this is the field that exists. That we were able to develop because it just happens to be within the S1 and the EDA here. And then the boat storage was relocated over here. So the idea is to add a few extra practice fields and a small building. Now, any building has to be incidental to the field, so it can't be a principal use. And we discussed with the neighborhood, the folks that live on Cross Street that attended the meeting, that building would be small, incidental, and it would be sheltered from their homes. This is an open space use. There are access points down into Cross Street, and as part of this, as Barney had indicated, no access would be afforded through those routes. All access would have to come through the commercial district. This would be done through a special permit process. Neighbors and stakeholders would be involved. And we think that the neighborhood can be adequately protected. We think this is a limited use. It's an open space use, and it enables the Revolution to stay in Foxborough and have their headquarters in Foxborough, have their own independent facilities so they're not dependent upon relying on shared facilities. Does that address?
Yeah, I understand the concept. It's just that it seems that area is such a different use from all the others that I was wondering why that was bundled in instead of treated as a separate item.
So the question is why this proposal was bundled in with the others. To my experience is that we have an opportunity to look at Route 1 comprehensively. This is an opportunity for the town to determine whether they want to see more economic development in the direction of economic development. And I think to the chairman and Paige's comments, it's also, if you were to vote on each of these independently, some may pass muster and others won't. Some are probably more acceptable than others. But as a package, They pertain to the same overall area and to the same overall goal. This will clearly, this one is targeted very much at economic development, because that's undeveloped property today that the town is not really getting any meaningful revenue from. If it was approved by town meeting and with the protections afforded by a special permit, the town will realize real annual net tax revenue from the development for an open space use, which is, I think, from my perspective, from a land planning perspective, a fairly responsible transition use between commercial and residential. So that's, I think, part of the reason why it's included. And we think, on behalf of the stadium organization, the efforts at parity are very, very important to us, to benefit others, where I think a lot of those, the flexibility is already afforded to those with property within the EDA, that overlay. This is one where we have a proposal. It can create economic development immediately, and we think it's important to include.
I just wanted to add one more comment to that. In addition to the tax benefit to the town, also by, making this available for the Revolution and keeping them here, we are able to retain all of the ticket-related income for all those games. And it's definitely in 6 figures, probably multiple 6 figures each year, that the town benefits from that. So it really is a dual benefit.
To Lorraine's point on the Revolution as a team and where they play, these would be practice fields. They would support the Revolution keeping their headquarters in Foxborough. Obviously, if you read the news, they've been keenly interested in looking for a standalone soccer facility to play at, but this would be where the Revolution would maintain their headquarters if it was approved.
Okay.
Yes, please.
I don't understand the current mercantile retail use requirement. When you say 25% of the gross floor area, does that mean a 400 square foot building could only be used 100 square feet?
That's exactly what it means.
How does that currently work?
Not very well. That's why you don't.
If you look at seasonal pool, that's a good example, because they have the seasonal pool, they have the retail area, but they also have to have the dentist and the warehouse. If you look at that whole site, it's kind of like, why do you have a retail, but then you have all these other uses? And that's a perfect example, I think, of the parity, whereby the percentage is not a problem when you're in the EDA, because the stadium has non-retail space galore, so they're able to make that 25% without a problem. They can do as much retail as they want, whereas the rest of the owners outside of the EDA don't have the benefit of that retail space. So I think the seasonal pool site shows exactly the issue that is dealt with there.
Thank you.
Yes, Larry.
Yeah, I just had a question for this gentleman. Maybe I misunderstood you. You seem to say that the Revolution, even with this development, would still go play somewhere else, out of town?
No.
Oh, so they would stay in town playing all their games at the stadium?
That's the current plan. And so I don't want there to be any misconception. The proposal is to expand and enable the Revolution to maintain their headquarters here. That is, all the jobs, all the...
Well, I'm thinking that Lorraine brought up the ticket revenue. That means they'd be playing here.
The ticket revenue is associated with the games, right? And so that's not really part of this. So what I'm saying is, if there's an opportunity for a standalone soccer stadium at some point, they've been looking at this for a long, long time, as you may know. This does not bear on that, right? They could still very well, for a number of business reasons, identify and construct a soccer stadium for their games, for their matches. But this would enable, I think, what ultimately is very important, that their headquarters and their practice facilities and everything that flows from that would stay here in Foxborough at the stadium.
Is there a way to quantify what that is worth? in revenue to
I'm
the town?
sure we could. I'm sure we could. It's a fair question.
Yes, in the back.
The bottom line, though, we lose the ticket revenue from the revolution.
No one's losing anything.
Well, if they're playing in a different town, how the town not losing?
It's always been, what I wanted to be clear, because this is often a point of confusion, is that at present time and into the future, the plan is for the Revolution to continue to play here. But the organization has looked at and assessed a number of different off-site locations for a standalone soccer stadium, and that is what the industry and the sport seems to be trending towards. So I cannot tell you unequivocally that they'll stay here for the end of time. That's all I wanted to say. They're not leaving. I don't want to be alarmist. But what I do want to emphasize is that they are in real need of additional support facilities, and that's why this is part of the proposal. This is what we feel, and we've looked at a number of sites. There's a lot of good things happening on the stadium site, including the pilot program for commuter rail. There's some real important initiatives that are being advanced towards the goal of further economic development. But for the Revolution to continue to maintain and practice and stay here, for their headquarters of the team to stay here, they need more standalone facilities.
Please,
I have a lot more questions, but just.
we'll take them one at a time.
On this item alone, let's go stay there for.
Sure.
Okay, so it looks like the first section of it is adding a use, and it's called athletic fields and athletic facilities. So are you including closed facilities there as well? I'm thinking of like the football team has a closed, what do you call it? Facility up there, or.
A practice
maybe-
dome, a practice.
Practice field?
Or there's another force kick or something, those kinds of things, is that what that includes?
I think that, again, one way to answer that is if the Revolution wanted to do something like that in the S1
Someone
district,
else.
okay, they could do
Forget the
that.
Revolution. So I'm looking at this article, is this a generalized article that says they can have athletic fields and athletic facilities, like Four Kick or someplace like that? Is this a?
In the S1,
we're
yes.
adding?
That is a use that we would be adding to the S1 district,
Okay,
correct,
so I'm
yes.
trying to clarify and
Yes.
understand.
And if somebody wanted to do that in the R40, it would be subject to a
Okay,
special
That's the
permit.
second section, though.
Okay.
It's not included in the first section. That R40 part of it looks like it's the second B, and that specifically does what you want to do because we happen to have a particular use that we see that could be valuable. Am I reading that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Subject again to special
Special permit.
permit by the planning board. And access to that facility, if the planning board were to grant a special permit, could only be through a non-residential district, number one. And because it's subject to a special permit, it's also subject to whatever reasonable and appropriate conditions the planning board deems appropriate, necessary and appropriate.
Now, I have a really great suggestion. I think this is a good place to bring it up. I believe, the planning board mostly, but that when you do parking, that we ought to change our parking requirements. Because you have it set up right now, I believe, for covering whatever business it is, has this many people, blah, 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 blah. Every business that comes in, you want to have grow, and usually does. And we end up always, almost always, parking issues wherever something is built. I wondered if there couldn't be something in the future, maybe we should start someplace like here, where you could have a contingent space set aside that you knew that they had space, that if ever there was a problem, it could be used.
It's here.
So that you had, you know, because sometimes it's so tight, there's nothing else they can do.
But exactly what you're saying is in here.
Yes, they, you know, even if they had to do a cinder one for the auxiliary at some point. They're not required at the beginning, but you have the potential already built in.
That's the reserve parking provision.
Yes, it's in here.
So it's never been done before, we're gonna start doing it now? Is that what you're telling me?
That's what we're proposing.
Right, and I would say that it's not that it's never been done before, it's never been done before up there, but there are buildings in town where that has been done before, commercial buildings.
But it's
Page 9.
It's not required, but you've managed to get them to do it, but it hasn't been required.
Right.
I think
Page
it should be
9.
required. Thank you, where is it?
Page 9.
It's item number 7.
Reserved parking.
Oh, that's what that's all about?
That's what that's all about.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Um,
Does anyone else have a question? You have more?
okay. Okay, so why aren't you making the whole S1 district the economic development district, whatever it's called? Why, are there some things that are gonna be more specific that you have to leave out, or, I can't understand that.
Well, we
I
took,
mean, I know, as I said, there's some grandfather things, I can understand that, but do those grandfather things really make a difference? Can't we just leave them be grandfathered and try to make it like uniform, so it's not so?
well, it depends on how the language in the original Economic Development Area Overlay District was written. One of the things we don't want are more stadiums. So that, if you just went it from wall to wall, end to end,
Not more stadiums.
well, I think we all agree. I mean, we can't even agree that we really have room for an additional soccer stadium in this town, let alone, a competitive stadium of some kind. And if you remember, there was someone who came through this town not that many years ago who proposed a use of a racetrack, and he was trying to get it in here under the guise of it was a stadia. And because of that, it was not allowed use. He tried a lot of other machinations as well, but the point is that, that's just one of the reasons. I mean, there was a lot of discussion with the people in the Route 1 Business Association about this, and we had conversations about should we just do it from end to end, or the benefits to doing it the way we're doing it. And I think the general consensus became, as long as the parity was given within the S1 zone, we didn't need to create an economic development. First of all, it wouldn't really necessarily be an overlay district anymore, because everything would be the economic development area. So you'd be eliminating the S1 zone. There are certain things in the S1 that were still smart. So, we're trying to do it the best way we can without making it a different kind of a problem.
Going back to that reserved parking, that's not gonna affect anything else in town.
It'll
That's why
apply
I'm
to,
suggesting
it will
that
apply to
you
other
use-
reserved
is
parking
that-
will apply to all parking areas.
This applies to all parking areas.
Section 6 is parking for the whole town. So yes.
6 and 7 are the whole town.
Well, I'm sorry, Section 6 of the zoning bylaw affects the whole town, so.
Yeah, not
But
Section
yes,
6
but
of this.
actually, 6 and 7 will affect the whole town on this list.
That's all part of the same warrant article?
Yes.
So,
It just doesn't seem, that's just.
It's beneficial. This is something that other communities have had for years.
but it looks like you were making this be an S1 article. So
It's an
why are
S1
you
focused,
saying was gonna
it is an
apply to the whole
S1 focused
town?
article.
How can it apply to the whole town? It just-
Because at the time we're revising this, we're revising certain things about the overall parking regulations.
Because our parking regulations in Section 6
You're doing it
apply for the whole
separately?
town. There's no special parking just for S1.
One, exactly.
And then just for downtown. There's actually parking regulations, they cover the whole town. So that is why this is actually bringing our parking bylaw into modern times. Because shared parking is very beneficial, because what we actually want is to reduce parking, believe it or not. I know you don't,
Yeah, the general,
Zoning proposals.
it is Route 1 zoning proposals, but it does affect the whole town. And the general, let me just finish for a second, Joan. Let me just finish. The general consensus among both consumers and the developers is the existing parking that we have right now is way more than we need. So you have these big fields of asphalt, and you have all these people who are saying, I built this parking for what reason? You know, I only have X amount of employees, I have X amount of people who are frequenting my restaurant or frequenting my theater, or whatever that use might be, and it's way over, in general, it's often thought to be way over what we need. So that's why we're trying to revise it. We're trying to make it better, you know, both for the public and for the people who own the buildings.
That's not so unless it's up at Patriot Place because they got plenty of parking, but.
I could take you to almost any commercial area in this town under the existing parking bylaw and walk you in and let you talk to the people who built that building, and they'll tell you, they made me put in too much parking. Almost anywhere.
I know 5 places right now that it's like, and they're big places too.
Yes, and you think do you think they have too much or not enough?
The basketball one, we've got my development, we've got up at the Tree Tech, that's in Belcherville, we've got it all over the place.
Do you think you have too much parking or not enough?
I've got 12 of them that I could take you to.
But I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you, do you think you have too much parking or not enough in those situations?
All of those don't have enough,
All of those, so you, at your own building, you don't have enough?
don't have enough.
How did that get by?
We all, every one of those was built with the adequate parking that they were required to.
Yeah. Yeah, you can answer. Yes, please.
I would agree with Mr. Weinfeld that I have an office building that I probably have 20% too much parking. It's never been completely used and my building's full. So it has to do between net and gross, and it gets very confusing that way. So I would agree with that parking requirement. Current one is too liberal as far as trying to have too many spaces. But my question asks for, did the committee look at extending the S1 zone down Route 1? In other words, it kind of stops right actually before my building, and I'm in a highway business district. So I don't know if that helps or hurts, but it seems like, why wouldn't you continue all the way down Route 1?
I personally don't have an answer for that.
It probably predated my going on the committee. I think there was some discussion, but it was felt that it was best just to, address specific provisions within the S1 to, as Peter said, to update, to obtain parity with the overlay district. Some of the changes that we've made in the S1 are parity with provisions in the highway business district, particularly on the dimensional requirements. That's one of the things we looked at. But I don't think there was any lengthy or detailed discussion relative to perhaps extending one district. We felt it was best to make the appropriate provisions within the district itself as opposed to a rezoning of the districts within the town.
We did look at, my recollection without consulting the bylaw at the moment is, and to affirm Barney's point, there are a number of uses, for instance, in the highway business that are not allowed in the S1, including some that would potentially risk being grandfathered if we extended the S1. So we quickly concluded that we should probably leave the highway business alone in that location. But to Barney's point, some of the provisions that were identified in terms of uses are allowed in the highway business. So we saw no reason to not look at the district more comprehensively, the corridor. And insofar as, I think to Joan, to your point and question about the parking provisions and the shared parking provisions, I think you started by asking whether or not these, your suggestion, at least as I understood, was that the parking provision should apply to the town as a whole. And so that the public understands when the economic development group started looking at these issues, they were focused on Route 1. That was their task, the subgroup. So you can't very well change and allow for, there were a few of these that do apply to the town more broadly, including the shared parking concept and the reserved parking concept. As a policy matter, it seemed to make sense that if you're going to enable a special permit to allow for shared parking in the S1, you should offer that to the rest of the town.
Yeah.
How would these changes compare, if these changes were to pass, how would the new zone in regulations compared to what the adjacent towns, north and south, on Route 1?
To be honest with you, we did not spend time looking at Walpole or Norfolk or Rentham, specifically. Paige is familiar with some of those towns because she was the planner in Rentham before she came to us, if you'd like to answer that.
Sure. Well, I could say that Rentham, if you drive down Rentham, you'll see what is allowed, how their zoning's working out. Nothing. Much like, so they are at a process, they're looking at our zoning as well. We're all sort of doing corridor studies at the same time. So they're in the process of overhauling their zoning as well. So it wasn't really valid because their zoning was not working as well. And Walpole, you'll see they're building hotels and whatnot, so it's compatible. That right over the town line, you'll see a hotel going up that's similar in nature to what you're seeing at Patriot Place. So that's compatible with Walpole, to the extent I'm aware. I haven't fully dissected it, but there are compatibility there.
And Walpole's made some changes in the recent past to their downtown area that's allowing more multifamily apartment communities to be built and things like that, which is different than, some of the things that we were addressing.
We do have, one important thing to note is we do have a contingent of Route 1 business owners here, and it might be important for you guys, maybe if you have anything to say, or, I know you were part of the process, but I think it's important to hear from you as well, and let folks know sort of your thoughts.
We have these for R&D.
Don't everybody jump at once.
Oh, you know what? I don't. Okay.
Yes, please.
I mean, it looks like it seems to me to be positive for the town. I ran a business in town, I own property. I no longer live here, but my kids all went to school here, and I think it's good to me, it's good for the town, for the future. It's a lot of, I think, it opens it up. I think it'll increase the income for the town, which is, that's what I always look at when I lived here. I was on the advisory, I was on the school committee, all these. But I think in the long run it's good. But as far as, I think Larry, is that Larry?
Yes.
I haven't seen him in years.
Yeah.
But, I can see, as a resident, how it's sort of bunched together. But I think that the overall picture, I think it is good, good for the town. I don't know about the issue about the park, certain things, like, I don't know, I don't understand how it affects the residential. I think it's all right if it's, I don't think it's, it could have been put separately. It might have been easy to get passed. Like Larry was saying, you need 2/3, it might, you never know for the 2/3. Where if it was divided up in different,
And I hear you, Bill, but I think one of the things that we were trying to accomplish by making this all one thing was to show that it was comprehensive and to not wind up with a jumble of, okay, these 3 passed this year, next year you're going to come back and try to get these 5 or whatever, and try to get people to understand that the potential for the entire area is what's going to hopefully, create the interest and want to make people who are coming here to develop that area and make it something special, make it something, worthwhile.
I think
So
I think it'll happen with this.
We think so too, and I mean,
I think Route 1's, the place to be for expansion.
I don't think there's any question. I think we all really.
The only negative to me was that the revolution moved out, that's all.
No, we understand that, and we hear you, but to repeat what Peter had to say, they have not been hiding the fact that for a long time they've been considering that, and, they could have done that and built these practice fields wherever their new location was too, and we would have had nothing, relative to that. So I think that.
I know the Major League Soccer wants that too. They
Yeah,
want to-
and so, but I think that, they're making an additional commitment, to themselves and to the town by doing this, if we can get people to go along with it. So, again, I don't see a downside there. I mean, for people who live up there, they should also be considering the fact, as Peter said, it's an open space use. they could have turned around and said, hey, we just looked at these X amount of acres we have, and we can do a subdivision in here with another 50 houses, or whatever it would hold. And they would come to the planning board and put it through, and then you'd have people, who might come in and say, well, what's that going to do to our school system? What's that going to do to our public safety? What's that going to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So, there's a trade-off there. There's no question about that. There's some trade-off there, and maybe some of the people in the neighborhood would like to see, single-family homes expanded, and I think others will go along, hopefully, and say, you know what, that's a pretty benign use.
I think it's great too, all the office park there. I mean, I think it's fantastic for the town.
Bill, I want to pick up on your comment about income. In 2015, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council did an analysis of Route 1, a study of Route 1. And based on tax rates that were in effect at that point in time, and based on assessed values at that point in time, they stated that the annual revenue to the town for businesses on Route 1 was about $1.67 million per year. And they did a build-out analysis. And their build-out analysis was, again, based on the 2015 tax rates and the 2015 assessed values. And what they determined was, they had 3 different scenarios, and what they determined was annual revenue to the town, if there were full build-out on Route 1, could range between $5.1 million per year and $5.9 million per year. Now, there are certain aspects about that particular study that are not relevant to here. Number one, they based it on zoning that was in effect in 2015. Yeah. And obviously that zoning has not generated the kind of development on Route 1 that we feel is appropriate, and we feel that these proposals will allow for that. They also included in that analysis residential uses, and we're not proposing any residential uses. There's nothing in our proposal relative to the S1 district or the overlay district that would allow for residential use. It's all for commercial use. So I think that 5.1 to 5.9 million may even be a little bit low. Now, that's not going to happen overnight, and zoning proposals and zoning amendments by themselves are not going to generate that income. It's going to take initiative from landowners and from developers. But I think that gives you a sense of where we could be. We could be from 1.6 million to almost 6 million, per year. So these proposals could be the jumpstart for some significant income to the town.
And so it seems great to me, because I was concerned as, we're looking to move back into town, my wife and I, but if there was a big residential complex up there, that means another school, I think this is great, it was office for the town. If you live in the town, I think it's still like a nice small town atmosphere. It's one of the slowest growing population-wise in Norfolk County still, since like 1970. When you think some of these other towns, so we had 15,000 people, now we have 30. We had 15,000 people, now we have 17 plus. So I think it's great. It still keeps the small town atmosphere while increasing revenue, and plus keeping it on Route 1, so it doesn't affect the other developments in the town, and you still have the residential small town feel.
Yes.
I have a comment. One of the challenges you have along Route 1 is the vacant land. A lot of it's being used for stadium parking. Mm-hmm. So the challenge you have is there's zero, minimal investment in the land to get effective cash return. So that's a challenge that you have to get those landowners to say we're willing to make the commitment. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is that there's no sewer along Route 1. That's the biggest challenge right now in my mind, because a lot of the land that is not developed is not suitable for on-site septic systems. A lot of ledge. There's also a Zone 2 and Zone 3 water protection district that also limits what you can do up there. So I have a commercial building that has a septic system, and that's a challenge. For me to build an additional building because it's one lot, I'm limited by the 10,000 gallons per day. It doesn't take much to get over that. So hopefully you can parlay that with some type of sewer proposal that I think is somewhere in the works. That would be the biggest challenge, because with an office use, it's very high septic demand. And one of the things that I've learned is very concentrate sewer, as opposed to like residential, you've got showers and dishwashers and laundry, it's a very concentrated. That creates even more of a challenge for a septic system. So I think if you can parlay some type of zoning change, that is at least encouraging the landowners, but a lot of the landowners don't have adequate percolation rates and a lot of refusal to be able to use it for another type of use.
And the Metropolitan Area Planning Council study that I referred to took into account those kinds of considerations. So.
Yeah.
Is there any plan, is the storage part of any of this plan? Is there any discussion?
Lots of discussion, but not part of this zoning proposal.
We keep hearing rumors they were studying, they were surveying Route 1, and that the craft group was looking to expand their use of their storage, which I thought meant we'd be able to hook on Route 1 business people onto this system. I heard, there was rumor it was being underutilized. You work for the crafts?
I do.
A lot of us want to hook on.
Yeah. Well, I can direct you to, if you know Dan Krantz, I think he's in the room somewhere. You should, I'm good at, as his lawyer, I'm good at referring him to you. I can appreciate Mr. Spears' comment. Sewer is clearly a challenge. What I heard from the group as they've been meeting for the past year is that sewer is a practical constraint, right? It's not ultimately zoning. So this is the first piece of that. The issues as to sewer would be great issues to handle if there, to Mr. Spears' point, if there is demand for some new development. And so with the idea is that by creating some parity along Route 1, you change those incentives so that folks will make investment, will look to build, and with that, the discussions about sewer can advance both with the municipality and with the stakeholders.
Thank you.
Walpole have sewer?
What, Walpole does, yes.
They're on the MWRA.
Did you allow for, what we've been looking for, maybe you changed the zoning and I don't even know it, in town for any elder housing, assisted living, nursing homes, other facilities like that? Have you done anything to encourage?
Not in this particular zoning package.
I know we looked at it 5 years ago. Did anything ever come of it?
Well, I could tell you that there's a piece of land that the state had controlled for a long time that our local housing authority is involved with, and the plan there is to do some more, what is it, senior housing?
Senior housing.
Senior
I'm
housing.
talking about encouraging building of assisted living, townhomes or individual homes and apartment and assisted living.
We're taking on senior housing next. I'm applying for grants for that. We have to do a housing production plan, and we're trying to do it in a way that it's going to generate a lot of community involvement, because everyone wants senior housing until it's proposed in their backyard. So it's all good in theory, but until it's coming to your neighborhood, trust me, you don't want it. So I want to have a conversation where we're all talking about, Foxborough is now in a great position. You have over 25, you have your over 10% affordable housing. We're now in a position where you can focus on senior housing. So that is the next step from the planning board's priority, and we are going to be tackling that.
Possibly ever look at Sunrise down in Norwood. It's in the middle. And it's like from here to that wall, next to residential homes, beautiful colonial residential homes, a block up behind the center of town. It's called Sunrise.
Mhm.
And they're all over the place, right in residential neighborhoods. And they're so beautiful, so wonderful, at their addition.
Again, that's a market-driven thing. It's allowed in zoning.
Well, I'm just saying,
it's
it's
not
not so
some-
detrimental as
Right.
sometimes it appears.
But that's a use we would not be proposing on Route 1 due to the game day events and possible service calls and such. So this is, again, we're not proposing residential, we're just focusing on the commercial. But housing is, stay tuned for housing that's coming in the future.
Yes, Larry.
Yeah, I think in one of the slides, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had, the one use was, biotech fantastic. But another one was, looked like you could have a water park. It might be.
The recreational uses?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm wondering, so on the one hand, you've got this, high value, long-term investment, credible wage jobs, and on the other, seasonal, mainly probably minimum wage, not nearly the value. So what was the thinking about allowing both? I mean, don't we run the risk of, you talked about this as the engine of economic growth. Don't we run the risk of having this engine of economic growth be nothing but, I'll be purposefully kind of exaggerating here, but, you could have nothing but playing fields and a water park, right?
But Larry, I think I misspoke.
I think you did.
Yeah, which, notwithstanding the fact that I drafted it, is easy for me to do. So we're revising the definition of outdoor and indoor recreational uses. But the key wording is at the very end, it's but not including amusement parks and water parks.
Not including.
Not including.
So I apologize.
That graphic probably should be removed.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, put a big X through it.
Very good.
so even though I wrote what's on paper, when I looked at that, I got confused myself, which is, again, very easy for me, but it does not include amusement parks and water parks.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing it to my attention, so.
Anything else?
Wrap that up?
Please.
You mentioned that you knew of some examples of the biotech or R&D facilities in other towns. Could you share those?
Next slide.
Sure. So I think this follows up, if this doesn't address your question, then it's not the right slide, but the state is obviously a big R&D biotech development state relative to others. This is a core area for life sciences. The state has this designation called Bio-Ready, and you can get, I think Paige knows this better than I, but you can get awarded various grades as if it's the Olympics. You get, I think they go up to platinum though. Life science companies and those that develop for life science companies are keenly interested in those communities that have a high mark in terms of bio-ready. That means that essentially it's shovel-ready. They're ready for development. They have zoning in place. They have facilities in place. They have infrastructure in place for this type of development. As Barney had summarized, the communities vie and tenant and landlords vie for these types of uses. It seemed to make sense, I think to Larry's point, to make sure that Foxborough is ready with the advent and the potential for commuter rail, that Foxborough is as ready as any community in the Commonwealth to be able to try to lure some of these very good jobs and some of these employers to the region. These are the, across the state, you can see they're concentrated mostly in Metro Boston, Cambridge, but increasingly these companies are looking outside because of, particularly, we're sort of as a Commonwealth, a victim of our own success. Kendall Square occupancy and rents are increasingly excessive. So they're looking for communities that are tied to public transit and that are more affordable. And so the 495 Metro West Partnership, which is a group that includes Foxborough, these are the communities that are in the bright colors that have some bio-ready designation. And don't ask me which, I didn't write down which of these is higher, but I would guess maybe platinum might be a brighter color, but don't hold me to it. But the point is that if you're looking to locate a biotech company and you're looking at communities, you're not going to look at those that are outside of these 84 communities in the Commonwealth. You just aren't. And so from a planning perspective, this doesn't guarantee that Foxborough will successfully get some of these companies, but it certainly is an incentive for them to give a close look at areas up and down Route 1.
Thank you.
I think I should probably be thanking you, but I'd like to understand better, because it seems like you're doing a lot of the work for the town and you're not having to put out for a contract, but I don't understand the relationship quite. I mean, I know you have an interest, and so that perhaps you would make those interests known.
Yeah.
You're part of what kind of committee, or what is it?
So, Joan,
You're
I'm a lawyer. I don't work for the town.
Work for
I work for the stadium. And the stadium is represented on the Economic Development Group, just as a number of the other stakeholders, some of whom are represented here in the back of the room. And so my job was, as I understood it, was to facilitate and help support Barney and Kevin and Paige in identifying areas of commonality where we could work together on behalf of all the stakeholders who haven't always seen eye to eye, and identify areas that are common sense improvement, all for the goal of economic development and further economic development along Route 1. So I always make my interest clear, which is I do represent the stadium. They are, I guess, the largest individual property owner, but they're just one of many along the corridor. So this is, I'm looking at Mike and others in the back of the room. This has been a collaborative effort.
Thank you. What's your name?
Peter Tam.
King?
Tam.
Like that.
Tam.
Yeah.
I can give you a card, Joan.
Does anybody else have anything?
Anyone else? Then I think maybe we should wrap up. Thank you. Thank you for attending, really. We appreciate it. And we hope you'll give us support.